All right, guys. So this part of the lecture, we're going to talk more about epithelial cells. So epithelial cells, let me get there. All right. Epithelial cells can be found in several different areas of the body. They can be found as a body covering. They can also line cavities of the body or line hollow organs of the body, such as like the digestive tract, the trachea, esophagus, insides of your lungs. And they can also be found in glandular tissue, so like lymph nodes, ovaries, testicles, any place that we're going to have some sort of a gland, we're going to find lots and lots of this epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue has several different functions. Okay, so it's there to protect. It's kind of the first line of defense in most cases. It's there to absorb, since it lines a lot of these cavities and tissues and lines several of these organs. It's there to absorb things. It's also there for filtration. It's going to help filter out any material that comes through there. That we find it a lot in the kidneys because of that. And it's also there for secretion. Most of these cavities or hollow organs need some sort of lubrication, so it's going to secrete substances that will help, say, like food passing through the small intestine to pass through easier. And it can also be, especially since it's glandular tissue, it's helping secrete a lot of those hormones. Okay. Some characteristics of epithelial tissue. So they fit really closely together. They often look like puzzle pieces, um, or sometimes people refer to them being sort of like fish scales, right? There's not a lot of space in between them. Okay. There are two basic surfaces that we see with epithelial tissue. The first is what's called an apical surface. All right. Apical surface means that this tissue has a free surface. So there's always one area. You can see it here in a couple examples. So this is the outside of the tissue up here that they're labeling as the apical surface. Okay. So that apical surface is a free surface. All epithelial tissue is going to have some sort of an apical surface to it. It's also going to have this lower kind of basement membrane called a basal surface, right? This is where it attaches to other tissue, usually connective tissue in most cases, all right? But this is this layer down here at the bottom. So it's always going to have an apical surface and always have a basal or basement surface. Other characteristics of epithelial tissue is that it is avascular, meaning it doesn't have any blood flow to it or blood supply. It gets all of its nutrients through diffusion from the layers below it. Okay, it does regenerate really easily, especially since this is kind of a sacrificial tissue in most cases. It is worn away quite often, right? So it needs to be able to kind of replace itself. Okay. We classify epithelial tissue by a couple number of means. All right. We can either classify them as either simple or stratified. All right. Simple classification means that it is one layer of tissue. Stratified means we have simply just more than one layer. So you can see the examples in here. All right. Simple, one layer of tissue. Stratified, multiple layers. Usually, the easiest way to tell that is just look for the nucleuses. There is one tissue that will kind of throw you off, though. It's called pseudostratified. We'll talk about here in a second. Its nucleuses, it's one layer of tissue, but its nucleuses are at multiple levels, giving it the appearance of being stratified. Okay, we can classify them by shape. We can classify them what are called flattened cells, which are called squamous or squamous cells. All right. We can classify them as cube shaped, which are simply just cuboidal, or there are ones that are much taller. They are what's referred to as columnar or column like. Right. The first of the epithelial tissues that we'll talk about is what's referred to as simple squamous or simple squamous. All right. Simple squamous cells are just a single layer of flattened cells. Okay. These are the ones that usually form the membranes or the linings of a lot of our body cavities as well as a lot of our hollow organs. All right. So you're going to find it in places inside of the thoracic and abdominal cavities. It would be along the walls of those cavities. We're also going to find it inside of the lungs as well as capillary beds. And the reason for that is really its function. Okay, simple squamous is used for both filtration as well as exchange of different substances. Okay, so we need to be able to diffuse substances across That's where we're going to see a lot of this simple squamous type of tissue. In the lungs, we're exchanging both carbon dioxide and oxygen in there. We need to be able to just diffuse them across that membrane and into the bloodstream, or from the bloodstream into the membrane and then into the lungs so we can exchange them. Okay, so you're going to see a lot of that tissue in those places. But again, simple single layer, all right, flat layer, usually dark nucleuses. You don't see as many of them here. These little small cells that you're actually seeing in these places are some of those. Okay. All right, simple cuboidal is next. All right, simple cuboidal again is just a single layer, this time of cube-shaped cells. Okay, we usually find these guys in ducts and glands. They're going to form the walls of both the kidney tubules as well as cover the ovaries. All right, you can see the example right here. You can see the apical surface is actually in the center on these. Okay, and then they are just simple basic cubed shaped cells. Let me grab a marker here and kind of mark them for you. So they are kind of this box shaped, all right, types of cells that we see around the outside. So they've got kind of this shape to them, and then their nucleus usually sits pretty much right there by the basement membrane. Okay. But those are simple cuboidal. They do both absorption, which is mostly what they're doing inside of the kidneys, or they're doing secretion, like they do in the ovaries. In the ovaries, we're simply having those cells secrete out hormones. Right. This picture over here that we just showed you is of the kidney tubule. All right, so this is the tube inside of the kidney. It's designed to both absorb water as absorb waste material to get rid of it. All right, again, there's going to be water passing through this apical surface, okay, or essentially filtration is being passed through that surface, and those cells are going to absorb it and then put it into this basement membrane so that it can be reabsorbed other places. Okay, so that is simple cuboidal. Simple columnar is next. So a simple columnar looks very much like simple cuboidal. They're just taller. All right. So these guys have more of that kind of rectangle shape instead of a boxed shape. You can see this one much better here. All right. So they have these really tall kind of column shaped cells. They've got the nucleus right along the bottom here at the basement membrane. And the neat thing about these guys is they have these other cells kind of embedded within them called goblet cells. These produce mucus. So we're seeing a lining of the stomach here. All right. These goblet cells are the ones that look like they have the top taken off them. So let me grab a marker. This one right here, if you notice, doesn't have that nice apical surface line like this one next to it does. Its apical surface line looks like it's gone. There's another one right here. Okay. Again, apical surface is more rounded than having this nice dark line that you see in some of these other ones. That shows you that that is a goblet cell. So that cell is producing mucus so that it can help protect the cells next to it so that they don't sustain as much damage. Most often, these simple columnar cells are what they call villi, meaning they have little finger-like projections. You can see them real faintly right here on the top surface. They are there to help absorb, all right? That's one of their functions, as well then as secrete. So the goblet cells are doing mostly the secrete. The absorption is then done by the cells next to it, right? And we're going to see most of these guys inside of the digestive tract. We don't see them much any other place. Next one is pseudostratified. So this one I was kind of warning you about before. So this again is just a single layer of cells, but the problem here is that some cells are taller than others. So if you look at this microscope slide here, you can see this is one cell right here. It goes all the way up and down, and then the one next to it is only this tall. All right, and then it's got this kind of this upper surface to it. So they're just a single layer. They just try to make themselves look like multiple layers. All right, again, you can see we've got nucleuses kind of along the bottom, and then there's a couple of them where the nucleuses reach up closer to the top. Okay, this is kind of just a drawn version of that same thing. So you can see some of them, their nucleuses are at the bottom, some of them are at the top. Okay, so they just look like a double layer of cells. They're actually a single layer. Um, they're sometimes ciliated, so you can see this cilia up here at the top, little hair-like projections. All right, we most often find these guys in the respiratory tract. They have goblet cells, very similar to the ones we just saw in the stratified squamous. All right, and again, they're there to do pretty much the same kind of function. They're there for absorption as well as excretion. But pseudostratified is most often just found in the respiratory tract, whereas um, stratified columnar, sorry, I went back too far. Okay. Stratified columnar, we tend to see this mostly is the top layer of our skin. Okay. So again, has a free edge. The free edge is usually flattened cells, and usually those cells are dead. All right. These are mostly found in areas where we need both protection as well as protection from friction. So locations you're going to find the stratified squamous are places like the skin, mouth, as well as the esophagus, whereas the pseudostratified is mostly just found in the lower portions of the respiratory tract. Okay, so stratified squamous is there. All right. We have a couple other ones that are just stratified epithelium. They're just classified by their shape. You're not really going to have to know them as a slide. Pretty much any of the ones that you just saw before, this is the one you'll have to know the slides of. These guys you don't have to as much. All right, so 2 layers of cells that are cuboid shaped. Stratified columnar, again, just 2 layers of cells that are column shaped, and stratified cuboidal and columnar where they're kind of mixed together. Right? These guys are actually very rare. We don't find them very many places. The only place we usually find them in is large glands. So it could be like your thyroid, your thymus. A lot of our large endocrine glands have those in them, but we don't see them very many places else in the body. Right. Another one we can have is what's called transitional epithelial. So transitional epithelium is a type of stratified epithelium. Okay, so it's multiple layers of cells. The difference between this one and some of the other cells is the shape of them. Okay, shape can actually depend on the amount. So if there's more of them, they can be cubed here at the bottom, and then the further out we get, they tend to be kind of oblong shaped. The only place, and I will again repeat this, the only place we find transitional epithelial is inside of the urinary system. Transitional epithelial creates a layer that does not allow for absorption or secretion. So whatever substances are in contact with the apical surface of transitional epithelial does not diffuse down through that and into the lower portion. Okay, so again, the only place you're going to find it, and this is the portion right here that you need to remember, is transitional epithelium is only going to be found in the urinary system, specifically the bladder. Okay. Glandular epithelium is the next one. So glandular epithelium, we've got one or more cells that are trying to secrete some sort of product. So these are in our endocrine or exocrine glands. Exocrine are always sweat glands. Endocrine are going to be ones that produce hormones. Okay, so endocrine glands are ductless, meaning they do not have a tube that leads away from them so they can secrete their substance into usually the bloodstream or into another organ. All right, they're going to secrete their substance directly onto the surface next to them. So that's why a lot of our sweat glands are exocrine glands. All right. Um, Sorry, I messed that up. So endocrine are ductless. They're just secreting directly into something else. Exocrine empty onto the surface next to them. So exocrine includes sweat and oil. Endocrine include most of our ones that secrete hormones. All right. All right, we're going to go ahead and stop there. Big takeaways from here are the different types of epithelial tissue. The other big thing that I would remember is the picture of each one of those. So only the ones that you saw slides of, and I'll kind of back up here real quick, are the ones that you're really going to be asked to kind of pick out. So simple epithelium, this is a picture that I would kind of remember what it sort of looks like. Simple cuboidal, again, this is a microscope slide that you might have to pick out for the practical. Simple columnar, all right, again, big thing here is the nucleus is all right here at the bottom. Right, pseudostratified, we've got multiple heights of cells. Nucleuses are a couple different places. So you can see these are all nucleuses. There's nucleuses up here a little bit further, but it's still one layer. Stratified squamous, all right, this is a good picture of that. So you can see multiple layers of cells, basement membranes along the bottom here, all right, and you can see they're a different shape here at the bottom than they are further up. Okay. Transitional epithelium, you might see a slide of that, or at least I know for a fact there probably will be a question about that on the quiz. All right, so you know that transitional epithelium is only in the urinary system. All right, those are the big ones you're going to see pictures of. Okay, so make sure you take a look at those and make sure you can kind of pick those out if you were to look at them on a microscope slide. We will have a drag and drop with those pictures as well for the day after the lecture here. Okay.